All right, good evening, everyone. It is 6:30 p.m. on June 22nd, 2026. I would like to call to order the meeting of the Finance Committee for Lisle Community Unit School District, 202. First up, do we have any public comments?
We do not.
Excellent. Now, our third item on the agenda are the minutes from the May 19th, 2026 Finance Committee meeting. Does anyone have any questions, comments, changes? No? All right. Are we in agreement that the minutes accurately reflect the May Finance Committee meeting?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so item 4 is the working cash fund interest transfer resolution, not the first resolution we are going to have tonight. Information regarding this topic can be found under 5A5 of the regular board meeting packet. Mr. Wilkinson, if you would please.
So each year, the district earns interest on the balances that are held in our working cash fund. The school code allows the board the authority to transfer that to any fund that it determines is most in need, with no requirement that that be repaid. Historically, the transfer has been to the educational fund, where it can be used to support salaries and other instructional expenses. For FY 2026, the budget that was approved last September anticipated a transfer of just over $32,000. Based on what we've actually earned so far and kind of what's expected to come in for the rest of the year, it's going to be just over $33,000, and that'll be all the interest earned in the working cash fund. I did get a question from a board member about whether both the working cash fund transfer and then the debt service fund transfer, which is our next item, which will also be approved tonight, if those were included in the FY 2027 budget. And the answer is yes. Both transfers, the working cash and the debt service, were in the FY 26 budget. And then I've also included those transfers in the FY 27 budget that we'll be talking about later this evening. Again, those transfers will occur at year end once we know all of the interest income, and that'll be reflected in the education fund balance once the transfer is made. And so unless there are any other questions, the recommended action is to approve the resolution within board books that authorizes the transfer of the interest earned from the working cash fund over to the educational fund at the end of the fiscal year.
Thank you very much. So moving on to the related item 5 is the debt services fund interest transfer resolution. The information for that can be found under item 5A6 of the regular board meeting packet. If you would continue.
So this is a similar item. It's a little bit newer than the working cash one. This one we actually started doing last fiscal year, in fiscal year 25. We're recommending that practice continue for FY 26 so that those resources based on the interest income can be used elsewhere for educational programs and operations. This transfer was included in the FY 26 budget as well. And then, as I also mentioned with the last item, this will be in our FY 27 budget as well. And so it's expected to be about just under $29,000 for fiscal year 26. Again, the final amount will reflect all of the interest income that's earned over the course of the year, and we'll make that transfer at June 30th from the debt services fund also to the educational fund. Again, unless there are any other questions, the recommendation is to approve the resolution within board books that authorizes that transfer from the debt services fund to the educational fund.
Thank you again. Item 6 is the amended intergovernmental agreement for school resource officers. That information can be found under item 5A8 of the regular board meeting packet. Dr. Filipiak.
The amended agreement reflects current laws. There had been some discussions about the importance of having parental information shared, before a student's question. There's been discussions of not providing fines if students perhaps vape at school. So kind of delineating the role of a SRO versus a police officer and protocols in case there is any sort of questioning of a student and having parents be involved in that questioning. And so this agreement is the same agreement that they have with the village with Naperville also. And so This aligns with the law. In terms of had a board member talk about one of our policies that references this, even though the language isn't identical, they're parallel and they don't seem to conflict. And so our attorney said that his clients are keeping the language recommended by press. Any questions related to this agreement? In essence, we pay half of the school resource officer's salary and the village pays the other half during the school year. So it's really a great support from the Village of Lisle to be willing to pay half of that officer's salary and benefits while they're at our schools. We also had a question whether or not this changes the role of the officer at all. It doesn't. That he'll still be involved as he is with all the schools. It's really just to reflect the most current laws.
Are we all comfortable with that? Good, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Flipiak. Man, I am tongue-tied today. All right, item 7 is the fiscal year 2027 tentative budget. Information regarding this can be found under item 7 of the Finance Committee meeting packet and under item 5A7 of the regular board meeting packet. This is the big one. Mr. Wilkinson, please take it away.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. And yes, this is what I'm sure all of you came for this evening. And so if I could just get the slides up on, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. So tonight I'm going to walk through our FY27 tentative budget, which will be presented for approval at the regular meeting this evening. Again, this is just the tentative budget. This is not the final budget. That'll be coming in September. I will just talk about kind of some of the high-level takeaways from my work preparing this budget, focusing on some of the major revenues and expenditures as well. And again, this is just a tentative budget. As we move through the rest of the summer and into September, these numbers will be refined until we get to the final product that's presented at the September board meeting. Similar to last year, whoops, maybe turn this on. That would help. There we go. This presentation is split up into 4 different sections. We'll just talk very briefly about the legal requirements for budget adoption, and then primarily just focus on the key highlights and some of the major revenue and expenditures areas. First of all, as far as meeting the legal requirements for budget adoption, school districts do need to approve the budget by September 30th. Prior to adoption, the tentative budget must be placed on public display for at least 30 days. And our public hearing for the budget, which is also required, will take place at our September 28th board meeting. And then the notice, the notice of the public hearing publishing requirements, it didn't quite come out right, but you get the idea. That will be in the Daily Herald tomorrow after this evening's meeting. As far as kind of like the key takeaways, the key things to remember, if you listen to one slide over the course of this evening, this is the key one. First of all, I'm very pleased to report that for fiscal year 27, we do have a balanced budget across the operating funds, and actually, in fact, it's actually balanced across all funds because we don't have any major capital projects planned for this year. But that is good news that we have a balanced budget. As far as some of the revenues, property tax revenues are expected to increase by just over $1 million. And then I also wanted to highlight the reinstatement of our book and supplies fees. While I don't know exactly what that's going to be at this point, we haven't done it for a while, and we did change the structure of those fees a little bit. I am estimating at this point just over $170,000 in fee revenues. On the expenditure side of things, salaries are going to go up just over $750,000 at this point. Again, that'll be refined as we finalize all of our staffing numbers into September. But that's about a 3% increase. And then employee benefit costs are going to go up about $550,000 or 7%. And that's actually one of our largest cost drivers this year. I think I've mentioned to you at previous meetings, we did see some higher increases in primarily our medical insurance premiums than normal. And so I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, but that is a larger than normal increase with this fiscal year 27 budget cycle. Finally, transportation costs, we're always paying attention to them. They are significant. But I'm pleased to report that at least so far, again, we're waiting for kind of these last bills to come in. We might have some that trickle in July that we accrue back to the current fiscal year. But kind of based on where we're at so far this year, it's coming in lower than budget. And so I reflected kind of what I hope is that trend of a little bit of a decrease, a lower cost in our transportation costs into this budget as well. And so obviously we'll see where the year ends up. We'll make any changes as necessary for September, but I'm hopeful that we'll see a little bit of a relief in our transportation fund costs. So again, overall, the budget remains balanced, and the fund balances are expected to remain pretty stable over the course of this fiscal year. Looking at some of our key revenue areas, in particular local sources, again, property taxes continue to be by far the district's largest source of revenue, projected to increase by about $1 million based on our levy that was approved back in 2025. CPPRT revenues, that's one of those sources that we've seen a little bit of some ups and downs since COVID, but at least based on the information I have at this point, I'm expecting that to remain pretty stable at just over $500,000. And then another little bit of good news, investment earnings. We were a little bit concerned at times that those interest rates were going to drop, but they have remained stable and steady, and so at this point I'm not projecting any kind of drop in our investment earnings, which is also good news. I did mention earlier the reinstatement of the book and supplies fees, so we'll see some additional revenues from that. And then we still have our lease revenues from both Chesterton and SACID, which are also important revenue sources for our operations and maintenance fund. But one theme you'll kind of see throughout this presentation that I just wanted to make sure I mention is that realistically, outside of our property taxes and possibly looking at this reinstatement of our books and supplies fees, everything else is really pretty flat as far as state revenues, federal revenues, and so really property taxes is the primary thing that is allowing us to balance this budget for next year. As far as, again, as I mentioned, state and federal revenues, there's really not a lot of changes built into our fiscal year 27 budget as compared to last year. State revenues projected to remain pretty much flat with no significant increases anticipated. Federal revenues are increasing slightly, but that's primarily just some carryover of some funds that weren't spent in the current year. We've been doing a much better job of getting those funds spent in the years that we get them, but occasionally there's some carryover, and so we will see a little bit of that into next year. And so that's the primary reason why there's a slight increase at this point. But again, these amounts are always estimates, especially at the tentative budget timeframe. And so as we move into September, Mary Beth does a great job of looking at all of our grants, what's come in, what's being carried over. And so she'll refine all of that so that it reflects the most current information when we get to September. As far as things on the expenditure side of the equation, salaries and benefits, obviously, as all of you know, based on our conversations, this is the largest aspect of the district's costs. And so we're expecting those to increase about 3%. In general, our collective bargaining agreements are going up about 4%, but we are seeing some savings based on a few retirements, and then there's just kind of normal staff turnover. People leave, people resign, new employees come in. Sometimes there's a little bit of savings there if they're a newer teacher and not quite as far on the salary schedule. As I mentioned earlier, benefits, that is one of our largest cost drivers this year, and that's primarily related to the health insurance renewal. Overall, projected to increase benefits by about 7%, even though, you know, the PPO went up 14% and the HMO went 16%. But health insurance is only one piece of our benefit costs, and so when you combine that with some of the areas, as well as some of the employee contributions that offset some of those medical insurance costs, when all the numbers are in there, it's actually projected to be about a 7% increase relative to last year's budget. On the purchase services side of the equation, expecting it to go, yes, sir.
A quick question. When you look at the 14% increase, that's the cost to the employees, correct, for those two plans, the HMO and PPO?
Well, the overall PPO is going up 14%, and then the district pays 82% of that increase, and the employee pays 18%.
Okay, and that's how we get down to the 7% increase?
Well, and then there's some other aspects in terms of you got your dental insurance, your vision insurance, your life insurance, which usually stays flat, and then what's happening with your TRS rates, because obviously TRS is a benefit, and so there's the 9% that the district pays, and then some other portions of that. So you can have some ups and downs with 9% based on what salaries are doing. And then there's the IMRF rates for our non-certified staff. So there's a lot of different things that go into the benefits. And so the spreadsheet I use has our specific employees, what they're going to make, what their benefits are going to be, and then we have the specific health insurance, dental insurance, vision. And so when all those numbers are put in there, it ends up actually being 7% and not the full 14.
Thank you.
So, let's see here. Moving on to purchase services, are expecting a little bit of a decrease compared to the prior year's budget. As I mentioned previously, the primary reason that is I'm hopeful that our transportation costs have stabilized a little bit and we're not seeing those large increases that we've noted in past years. I did want to just mention, and we'll get into purchase services a little bit more. I kind of wanted to break that down a little bit for the board so they kind of had a better understanding of what exactly is purchase services, what's going into that. But one of the areas here that I noted is annual software subscriptions. That's obviously become more and more a part of daily instruction and operations at the district level and all aspects of what we do as an organization. And so those costs are over $500,000 now, so they're pretty significant. In addition, food services, our contract costs there, we've been very pleased with Chartwell's. They're doing a great job, but that's another industry where we've not only seen larger costs, but on the positive side, we're seeing higher meal participation. And so the more kids that eat, obviously we serve more meals, then our costs for that go up. But we do receive reimbursement from the federal government as well as our participation increases. So that helps to offset a lot of those additional costs. But in terms of our gross expenditures for purchase services, we are seeing those contracted food service costs going up. For supplies and equipment, these costs have remained pretty stable over the years. Most of these costs are our established replacement cycles for technology devices and then technology infrastructure and things along those lines. Those are the costs that we share with you usually at the March meeting about all of the technology replacement cycles and costs. Trent does a great job of laying that all out, spacing that out over time. But those are a lot of the costs within this area. All of those help us make sure that we can continue our one-to-one program and make sure all of our systems stay current, stable, reliable, all of those kinds of things. Utility budgets, that's another area where I've reflected kind of the trend in the rates, and we're continuing to see those costs go up both on the energy side as well as on the gas side. And so I've reflected that in the budget. And then we do continue to leverage E-rate reimbursements. I think Trent mentioned that to you at our finance meeting, I think it was last month actually, where we're doing some of our technology infrastructure projects in terms of upgrading Wi-Fi access points, some of our cabling, things like that. We're leveraging some of those E-rate reimbursements so we can offset the costs of some of those projects. For capital outlay, no major capital projects are anticipated for this budget. As you may recall, we had some trail into our fiscal year 26 budget as we finished up the junior high renovations last year. We do have some budget dollars in here for lighting upgrades and energy efficiency improvements at both the high school and the junior high. We're hoping to offset some of those costs with the state school maintenance project grant. But when those projects will actually occur kind of depend on priorities and available time and resources, so we'll work through that in time, but I did include that as a placeholder in this budget in case we're able to get that done before the fiscal year is up. Final thing is other objects. The largest component here is our special education tuition. Those numbers change very frequently from month to month. So based on current enrollment and what we're anticipating those needs to be, that's what we've reflected in the tentative budget. Similar to many of the other areas, as we get closer to September, we'll obviously use the enrollment numbers at that time, what specific programs they're enrolled in, and update the budget numbers accordingly. But we are expecting to see a little bit of an increase in our costs there, but we'll see where that ends up landing as we move closer to September. In terms of some visuals of all of this, kind of taking a step back, looking at this as more of a broader perspective, you can see that property taxes continues to be the primary source at 83% of the district's overall revenues. State and federal sources combine for 9%. And then investment income and other local revenues make up the balance of our revenues. Just kind of reinforces overall how heavily we rely on property taxes to fund the district's operations. I did also want to address a question that I received regarding why the percentages on this chart differ than those you might see in the newsletter that was published for the summer of 2026. And it's really kind of two different numbers. This is our moving forward, what we're budgeting for FY27. What you see in the newsletter is actual figures, but it actually goes back to fiscal year 2025 because we haven't finished the year that we're in right now, fiscal year 26. So it's 1 year forward compared to 1 year back. So they're not going to exactly line up and match. Is that the area that you were specific? Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is kind of the same higher level view in terms of our expenditures. Again, salaries and benefits account for almost 70% of the district's cost. Purchase services make up another 15%, which is transportation, professional development, food service, software subscriptions, those items I touched on previously. And then other objects accounts for about 10% of our overall budget, and that really consists of two big items, which is our debt payments for the bonds that we have outstanding, and then also tuition for our outplaced special education students. And I did add this one in here. I've kind of touched on this throughout the presentation, but I thought it was a good visual for the board to have. You know, as we talk very frequently about what makes up purchase services, I thought this would be nice to be able to refer back to, or at least see, you know, what's the bulk of those expenditures. And as you can see, it says transportation and travel. Realistically, that's almost all transportation. There is a little bit of travel in there for staff that go to professional development activities. We might have some travel for sports things and stuff along those lines, but this is really our regular education transportation, our special ed transportation, and then also all of our athletic and activities buses to get to the various competitions and events that those students attend. And so that's a large portion of this purchase service area. Professional services, I did mention earlier, that's there's some professional development costs in there. There's also a lot of our contractors for the when our internal buildings and grounds group can't handle something, or they need to call in an expert, or they have to have an inspection done, or some kinds of services. Those all run through here as contracted services. We also have our food services in here for Chartwells. We have legal fees. We have audit fees to do our annual audit. We have architectural services for things like the life safety survey that we'll be talking about here in a month or two. And so all of those kinds of services go in this 23% that's called professional services on the chart. And then we also have things like insurance costs in there at 5%. And then I also mentioned the software subscription. So there's a variety of items, but obviously transportation is by far the largest within this area of our expenditures. The other one I just wanted to touch on, which is a little bit easier, is our other objects. Obviously, just other objects sounds pretty broad, but when you dig into it, There's the debt that we have, the principal and interest, and then the vast majority of it is our outplaced tuition for those special ed costs. The other thing you might want to notice on this one is that, the vast majority of these expenditures, those tuition costs, are kind of outside of our control. A lot of that is mandated by law as far as those services that we need to provide. And so while it is a significant cost within here, it's not something that we always have control over based on the students that are in our district. In terms of a few summary slides, this shows our 4 operating funds only, both the projected revenues and expenditures for fiscal year 27. I know there's a lot of numbers on here, but the main takeaway is in that bottom right-hand corner where we have almost a $200,000 surplus projected at this point for fiscal year 27. So it gets us a little bit of room if there's any changes as we move through the next few months. But obviously, we're very pleased to see that number is positive in the bottom right-hand corner. The other thing I wanted to touch on is you will notice that the O&M fund has almost a $500,000 deficit, while the transportation fund has a $500,000 surplus. Trying to nail down what those expenditures are in the transportation fund has been a little bit challenging over the last few years. And so I've actually shifted some of our levy out of the ed fund, out of the O&M fund, over to our transportation fund. If we start to see some of those transportation costs stabilizing, that's where you get into the situation where I've already done the levy, we've already approved the levy, and now we see, hey, maybe the expenditures aren't as high as we thought they were because they were going up so quickly from year to year. And so now we're kind of in a situation where we might have a little bit of a surplus in the transportation fund. And so obviously we'll monitor that as we go through the rest of this year, into next year, and then when we come to the board in December to approve the 2026 levy, we might start to shift some of those revenues from our transportation fund over to the O&M fund so that they start to balance each other out a little bit more. But again, there's been some volatility coming out of COVID, and so hopefully we'll see a little bit more stabilization in the transportation fund, and we can get those closer to zero on both sides.
So Dave, with the $178,000, that's basically statistically break even.
Yes,
Yeah, so, okay.
correct.
I mean, it could be negative by the time we get to actuals, it could be positive a year from now.
Correct, and typically, when we look at salaries and benefits, typically we spend 99% of our budget, 99.5%. I mean, it's typically very accurate. Now, that can be $100,000, $200,000 based on the amount of salaries and benefits that we have. And so probably there'll be a little bit of a surplus there. We have some other cushions in our budget depending on what might happen over the course of the year. So anytime I see that number, if it's about $200,000, I'm usually hopeful that we'll end up a little bit better than that at the end of the year. We'll probably see that here with fiscal year 26. We had, I think, last year about an $800,000 surplus. I think it'll probably be closer to $1 million, but again, it all depends on where does transportation flush out? Where does our other objects flush out in terms of tuition? Like those are the ones that you never know until the year is over and all those bills are in, kind of where you're going to land. Salaries and benefits, 99% of budget, feeling good. Everything else, we have control over those. A lot of those are budgeted for, and if you don't have the budget, you can't buy the items. But it's those other ones that we're mandated to provide, transportation and outplaced special ed tuition, that always make me nervous as we finish out the year.
No, thank you. I think, as you said, it seems there's a lot more volatility or variability in your past year's projections, but you've always been within 3%, so I'm confident. But this is...
Thank you. Yes. I won't go into too much detail here. These are our non-operating funds, the ones that have kind of specific revenue sources that are earmarked for specific items. There is a little bit of a deficit in the IMRF Social Security Fund that is planned. We've built a little bit of a balance up in those funds, and so we're spending some of those dollars down to get the fund balances more to that 90 to 180-day window that we like to see. Capital projects, we might, depending on what projects are actually completed, anytime we do projects within there, typically we have a deficit in that fund, but obviously we've set aside resources for those purposes, so whether we do those projects this year or in future years, we'll have fund balances to cover those costs. In terms of, this just kind of puts everything together, the overall picture of the district's position. As Mr. Heatherly was kind of noticing, there's a little bit of just a small surplus, and so for the most part, that beginning fund balance in the top right-hand corner of, I'm sorry that went onto 2 lines, I don't know how that happened, but in the top right-hand corner, it's just about 21.8 million, projected to finish the year at about 21.9. So pretty stable over the course of the year, not a lot of changes in our fund balance. On this slide, you will see those other sources and uses in there, and so you can see on the third from the bottom, there's the transfer of interest from the debt services fund, and then also the $33,700 transfer from the working cash fund. So those are the ones we just talked about to approve for FY26. Those will also be in the budget for FY27. What isn't in here, which is expected, is we are not making any transfer from either the Ed Fund or the O&M Fund over to the Capital Projects Fund. Historically, for a number of years, we did that $750,000 because we had some surpluses, and so we'd set aside those dollars for future capital projects. That is not in here. I think I've mentioned in the past that we did kind of accelerate some of those transfers to pay for some of the junior high renovations, and we did kind of a large transfer of just over $3 million. So I am feeling okay with that for this year and maybe another year or two, but at some point we will have to start to revisit that if we want to continue to save dollars and set aside dollars for future improvements in capital projects. But I always mention that just so that the board is aware that whether that is included or not included in the budget. And so just kind of in closing, the FY27 budget does reflect a balanced budget across the operating funds. The ending fund balances for this period are anticipated to maintain compliance with our fund balance policy. I think it's 4:120, I think is the policy. And then we are anticipated to maintain the highest financial profile designation that the state awards. And the administration is recommending approval of the FY27 budget as presented. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions that may have been thought of as I've worked through the presentation tonight. Okay, great.
Excellent. Thank you for that very concise presentation.
Welcome.
Thorough as always. So where are we? We are at item 8, facility use, baseball field number 7. This item is going to be presented informally. There's no packet currently available on either the board meeting on board books. Dr. Flipiak, if you would.
So for many decades, Lisle School District has allowed Lisle baseball to use the fields at the junior high, the fields at Sheisure, and then field number 7, which is the baseball field we own by the park, in the park district over by the high school. As we have a new coach that came to the high school baseball team this year, he's been working with Lisle baseball and said, do we have anything in writing at all? And we came to realize that it's been very informal over the years. And not that there was anything wrong with that, but it probably makes a lot of sense to have something in writing as to holding us harmless, where the priorities are, what the fees are. And so as we talk to the park district, as we talk to Lisle baseball, the park district only charges Lisle baseball a fee to maintain the fields, and so they're not making any money on that because the park district maintains the fields for us as part of our intergovernmental. We're hoping as part of this agreement we wouldn't charge Lisle baseball anything, but we do get asked periodically by other organizations, can we use your fields? And so we're a little concerned, why do we say yes to Lisle baseball and not to other organizations? And so before we put together this agreement, we wanted to share, A, we weren't planning to ask to be any sort of fee because we know that the park district's maintaining it. Number 2, as part of the agreement, it would only be able to be used by Lisle baseball if half of the participants are Lisle school 202 students. And so long as they're half of the participants are students, we're serving the same community, the same students. We don't see a need to charge. We feel like they should have priority. And so that was kind of the outline of the agreement we were going to put together. And besides the things like you'd expect, like the hold harmless, if anything was to happen due to their games, it would be their insurance. We would want to see proof of insurance. Anything else you can think of that I didn't share?
No, just our regular facility use guide doesn't contemplate renting out Wildy Field. It doesn't contemplate renting out Field 7. That's not something we really want to offer out and have being used on a regular basis. So those aren't even in our normal facility use guide. So that's why we think it's appropriate to come with a separate agreement to specifically cover Field 7 in this case, and cover some of those things that Keith talked about in terms of making sure they have the right insurance, hold harmless, those kinds of things. And then we can outline within there, again, if it's more than 50% of the participants or allow students, why there isn't a fee.
And the ability to use the fields themselves. We're not planning to expand the use of the fields beyond Lisle baseball, but we felt those parameters seemed reasonable to us. And so our plan was to bring a formal proposal agreement to you for the July meeting. If you have questions or ideas you'd like us to include tonight, we can add those. If you think of things in the next month, just send us an email, and otherwise we'll bring it for approval at the July meeting. Currently, Lisle Baseball is running a program, as they often do, for the summer, so we don't have an agreement currently. We're just following the kind of the informal program we have had in the past, but this would go into effect starting in probably latter part of summer.
Is there any verification of Lisle 202 students? Or is it
Yeah,
just,
we received a list of the who the students' names are, and so this year's summer high school, is it junior high and high school students? I can't remember, but this year's summer program, Lisle Baseball, the majority of the names on the list were by far
Okay.
Lisle 202 students.
Great.
I have a clarifying question just on the students. Is it students who are enrolled in 202?
Yes.
Or if they lived in 200 and paid taxes and could it be a 202 student, but maybe are homeschooled or attend a
So
private
that's a
school?
great clarification. It would say live within Lisle 202 boundaries. It wouldn't necessarily be attend Lisle 202 schools.
Okay, thank you.
There aren't any other of these informal agreements going on for other facilities, are there?
Not that I'm aware of. Can you think of any?
Well, there was St. Joan, which we brought that one to the board, so that one was discussed as far as them using Wildy Field. I think for the most part, as these are coming up, we're dealing with them. I think offhand right now, no, I can't think of any others. And so again, as we identify these, we will obviously bring them to the board to have the conversation.
And I think most of the other items are covered within our just normal facility use agreement. And so we had a conversation, for those of you new to the board, when St. Joan wanted to use Wildy Field, it made a lot of sense for them to use it so long as we weren't. And so they were expanded and covered within the facility use program, and they would fill that out and give us all the paperwork. But when it came to Lisle Baseball, we have no paperwork on file whatsoever, so they're the only ones that we're aware of that don't fill any forms out.
Any further questions?
We will bring this back in July.
Excellent. All right, well, that would bring us into agenda topics for future Finance Committee meetings. Obviously, we have this one, the baseball field. Does anyone wish to add any further agenda topics for upcoming meetings? No? All right. Wonderful. So, with no other agenda items, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, so that was Ms. Allman, Mr. Heldorly. So the Finance Committee meeting is adjourned at 7:08 p.m. Thank you very much, everyone.